Hi.
How's it going?
It's going.
It's going great.
We just made Big Ziti.
We did just make Big Ziti.
So we're a little...
And eat it. And then watch an episode of Sopranos.
I drank wine.
It's a pretty excellent night activity. Yeah.
I mean,
recommend
we'll
it to anybody.
We'll see how it goes in terms of recording a podcast.
Recording a podcast and like cheese nightmares, tapping into the like dream psychology of the show.
Perfect.
Mm-hmm.
I look forward to that.
There's a Sopranos cookbook. You can check that out if you care to go as deep into the show as some.
No, Alex has gone already this deep.
We've done it before. Yeah.
No,
it's
not.
the first time.
I mean, I wouldn't say we. Really, but definitely. We were going to make lasagna, and Alex demanded.
Well, I didn't demand. I insisted.
Insisted that we make Carmela's lasagna, and I had to really try to convince him that Carmela is a fictional character.
It was pretty good.
I mean, that lasagna was great, and this Big Ziti, to be fair, was also really great.
Was also great. So, there you go. Last laughs on you. Next time you can't have any.
Okay.
But we're not here to talk about that.
We're going to talk about Commendatori.
Yep.
Which, I mean, there's food in this episode. Paulie he's eating some, like, delicious squid ink pasta.
Yeah.
And he tries to order macaroni and gravy.
Yeah, and they're confused. They don't know about it.
They're very confused. I wish that I could have English translations of the Italians throughout this episode.
Yeah.
Is that possible to do?
Well, you could speak Italian. You could learn Italian.
That's a good point. I'm just wondering, like, if I had turned on subtitles, what would have happened?
No.
Okay.
I don't think so. I mean, because they do have subtitles and they do choose when to actually translate.
Which is interesting, right?
Yeah.
Like, I think I'd like to know what they're saying. It's amazing how clear it can be what characters are saying, even though I don't speak Italian, right? So, like, they're making fun of Paulie.
Right.
Or,
yeah, that's a great line.
I can't think of
you thought that the Germans were classless pieces of shit.
Yeah.
I referenced that as one of my favorite lines in the last episode we did. And it's just waiting until we got to see that part.
Yeah, no, it's great. But yeah.
Well, there's a lot to talk about in this episode. I mean, it's an episode that's written by David Chase and directed by Tim Van Patten.
So we know it's important.
We always you can kind of tell when they're focusing on an episode and that it's an important one. I mean, that's like Tim Van Patten now has been established as one of the main directors, and as the show goes on, he might even be established as the main director.
Which other episodes has he done so far?
That's a great question, but I can't answer that right now because I ate too much Big Ziti.
Okay, I understand.
We'll get back to you. Yeah.
I feel like he might have only done one.
Oh no. It's all unraveling. Well, he does a lot in the future.
We will write this in the show notes.
We'll get there. Yeah, we can just answer it later. It'll be fun.
So I was thinking it might be useful to organize this episode around themes that kind of
I think that's a great
come
idea.
up, because some of the themes really span both the New Jersey Sopranos world as well as Italy, and some of them could kind of some of them are kind of timeless is the wrong word, but some of them could span no matter where the Sopranos are.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I was thinking about the like marriage aspect, and we see a lot of examples in all aspects of this episode that discuss marriage. I was also thinking about maybe that concept of just kind of like returning to where you come from and the kinds of actions or emotions that you experience when you're doing that.
Yeah.
And then I was thinking about, I had one more.
Women, I think.
Oh yeah, women, right? So just like generally like women in positions of power, which is a good, a timely thing to talk about anyways. So.
And also a relevant piece of this episode.
Totally.
For sure.
Well, a relevant piece of The Sopranos. They deal with women and their power and not power.
Definitely. I think that some of the female characters, though, are really kind of like coming into their own as of this episode. In fact, I almost feel like it's like a new act for Soprano. No, for Carmela, not
for
Soprano. For Soprano. Oh, God, the ZD, it's kicking in.
I mean, I'm the one who's had wine, so.
Okay, well, that's okay.
Yeah.
But no, I feel like where this episode takes Carmela in terms of her realizations of what her life is and what power she actually has, and seeing
the power
Angie
of other mob wives,
Bonpezero dealing with some very similar issues to her own, where the show ends up, and maybe we can talk about that when we get there. But I think no, when this episode ends.
Oh, you said where the show ends up.
Well, like this show, like this episode.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. This is the ZD episode. It's a little looser.
A great podcast.
But no, where the episode ends, I feel that Carmela's almost like her arc has gone somewhere. I feel like she's kind of a new character in some ways.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think she's kind of figured some things out, and that her relationship with Tony will be different from now on. There was a few things, like even like that last scene of like Tony coming in the door and like looking at like not only a high camera angle looking down to make him like look diminutive or anything like that, but it's like it's so extreme. Mm-hmm. It like goes beyond anything we've ever seen of camera angles.
Okay.
Like it's excessive actually. It's like she's like looking down. Actually, even though I don't think she's in the room.
Yeah.
Right, but I think it's like the implications of it are strong. Like Tony kind of looks up and he's like so powerless. Yeah. Kind of from that angle.
Yeah.
And Carmela's now looking down, like I think she's realizing the power that she actually has over him. And actually in that last scene, here we are. I know it's talking about it, but that's okay. It's a good way to get into it. But in that last scene, when she's in the room doing the laundry, there's actually a painting behind her of roses, which we saw Angie taking the roses that Pussy brought and actually like hitting him in the face.
The question is though, has that painting always been there?
Well, what room is that?
Because we realized, I think it's their bedroom.
I don't think so, actually.
You know,
I think it's a different room.
Okay.
Yeah, but the schematics and floor plan of the Soprano house are not the most. It's hard to know.
I wonder if David Chase designed that house.
Kind of like David Lynch.
Like David Lynch, yeah.
Designed a house for Lost Highway.
Yeah, I was thinking about that. No, but I mean, we did realize that I thought maybe the picture of the four women discussing whatever they're discussing and the picture above Tony and Carmela's bed, I thought that had not always been there, but I think it always has been.
Yeah.
At least it's still there.
It's still there.
So I wonder about that floral arrangement. Anyways.
I'm just not entirely positive which room it is, so it's a little hard to tell.
Yeah, I hear you.
Yeah. But I think that it's very relevant, the like bouquet of roses. It's something that Angie then wielded, like something like kind of to like make up for all of the.
Let's talk about women then.
Okay, let's talk about it.
Okay. Where do you want to start?
Where do you want to start?
Well, I like to see, so for me, there's like some key women that we focus on in this episode that we've sometimes never met before. Yeah. Sometimes have met as another actor.
That's right. Yeah. Angie Bonpezero is actually cast
in two cases because, oh no, never mind. No, don't we see Silvio's wife as another actress at one point?
I think so, but basically it's only in like the montage of them like basically at the end of season 1 leaving the wedding. So we see them kind of like grabbing their wives and leaving. There's no like
not in the montage in the episode where there is the wedding. We see that.
Yeah, but there's kind of like, you're right, it's not really montage. It's not like Rocky, but there's like a quick succession of shots of like all of the characters like leaving.
Yeah. Anyways,
grabbing their
I think
family.
it's like Angie and her, and I forget her name now off the top of my head, but
right.
Both of them we've seen only as other actors.
Right. We've
never met Annalisa.
I thought it was Annalisa.
But... Yeah, I think you're right. We kind of know Rosalie. She was kind of a side.
She's becoming a bigger character, though.
And she will be bigger and bigger. I would focus on those, particularly Angie and Carmela and Annalisa.
Yeah, totally. Okay. Well, I think that's great. I thought the earliest thing in the episode that I was thinking of is when they're all at dinner and Don Vittorio walks in with Annalisa kind of like behind him. Everybody stands up, and I think that like the original interpretation of that, the like easy interpretation is like, oh, they're all showing respect to him.
Well, and
but
even
they aren't necessarily.
Tony like whispers to Paulie like, it's Don Vittorio.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And it's funny because he actually like kind of eyes down Annalisa in like a sexual way. Yeah. And like that's typically the relationship that Tony has with women. But the power dynamics kind of flipped on its head throughout the episode as we find out that she's actually running things.
Yeah. So. And we get so many mentions. Well, not so many, but we get 2 mentions of many mentions really of her being a female boss.
Yeah.
And a lot of the talk is around, well, this could never happen in America, right? So Tony says that to her directly. Furio says that to Tony and saying, like, what, you don't have that in America? Yeah. I find it really interesting. Like, what is it about her? What is it about Italy and the way that the mob functions there? Or, like, what is it that allows her to be who she is there? Because we definitely don't see anything like that, right? It's in direct contrast to what we're seeing of the women in SopranoWorld back in New Jersey.
Yeah.
So how is she different? Yeah, it's
well, she's involved in the family business. That's the first thing.
Right. Well, she's made a choice, unlike the other mob wives, right?
Yeah.
Like, she's made a choice to actually be involved. Her husband's in prison?
I think so.
Okay.
Yeah. 'Cause she says he's
and
never
her
coming
dad
back.
is Don Vittorio.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, it's not unlike Carmela.
Right.
In some ways, like had Carmela made a choice to be more involved.
But I don't know if it's an option to be. I mean,
no.
The culture, culture in New
yeah.
Jersey is like such a culture of patriarchy. I don't think that any of them would allow it to happen.
Yeah, so it's interesting. Maybe we'll come back to this too when we talk about like going back to where you come from. But like typically when we think about like the old world or whatever you want to call it, right? It is kind of this return to more traditional values,
right?
Of which patriarchy is definitely one of them.
Yeah.
And misogyny. And so it's just interesting, like in this world where there are so many of those things still present, that she was able to, we don't know what her path was, but probably the combination of who she is as a person and the situation and the context that was going on. But she makes some great comments too. Like she talks about why women make great bosses, right? Which she was basically saying like, well, all my brothers and whatever, like my husband's in jail, my brothers were all killed. And she's a great negotiator. And
she's a great negotiator.
But it's not like she acts like a dude either.
No.
She uses her power as a woman to manipulate.
Definitely. Yeah, that was a great scene actually. In the end, when they're negotiating in the like Oracle's cave, that was something that I don't think I realized as much until this viewing. I think when I reflected on this episode, I remember thinking like the show kind of almost maybe like lost some of its verisimilitude, like in terms of its like Tony getting with Annalisa. It just seemed cheap or something. But watching it this time, it was actually hilarious because I realized that like she's kind of initiating these advances and then Tony actually blocks it off. And then she kind of gets angry and immediately goes into business.
Yeah.
And for me, I mean, I think it just kind of implies that she was like using this sexual tension and sexual energy like completely for business purposes.
Totally.
She's completely manipulating the situation.
Yeah.
And then it goes into she's kind of angry because like that route where she has power over him is now gone, and they go into this kind of different type of negotiation.
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought that was super interesting.
Yeah. No.
One thing too with it actually is you were talking about like the old world and the values there, and typically you would think it's more conservative. I think that actually they touch on that, and it's an interesting thing to think about because even there where they're meeting at the cave of the Oracle, and she's knowledgeable about ancient history beyond what Tony is. So Tony talks about Roman history a lot, and then she kind of expands on it and talks about Greek history
and whoever
pre-Roman
was there before that.
And whoever was there before that.
Yeah.
So talking about the people that have inhabited Italy and the cultures and the beliefs and the like religious, maybe even like military aspects of these.
The oracles were always women too.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what I was getting at, like the old world, but it's beyond just the way of thinking of it in terms of like old Europe and like medieval Europe or like,
But that's kind of where Tony is, right? Because the only image that we kind of get into Tony's brain, well, we get a few images, obviously, but we get one really clear image of him dressed as a gladiator and her dressed as a slave woman or something. Like, I don't know. Like, and he's having this very short sex dream. It's a very
short
small,
one. Yeah.
But like he's caught up. Like he likes History Channel.
Yeah.
Right. And that's how he sees, and even, I mean, like, Paulie has this view of Italian women, right? Like, he's like, the women here, they're all so beautiful.
Yeah.
When Chris gets there, he's like, like, first thing is go to the topless beach and then to the volcano.
Mount Vesuvius, yeah.
Which I don't want to talk about that part
We'll get
very
there.
much. I know, it makes me so sad. But so they all have this kind of, like, image of these, I don't know, like, nubile
totally
country, like, like, kind of like the scenes from The Godfather, right? Like, where we have these kinds of characters who have, in some ways really little substance. They're beautiful, they're angelic, they're meandering through the fields, right? That's kind of, I think, how these guys see Italian women, right? Or see women who are different from the wives or the partners that they have back home, right? That image is really different from Carmela. It's really different from Adriana. It's really different. Well, Paulie doesn't have a partner, but they all have these images of what it means to go back to Italy and what women in Italy are like, and then they encounter Annalisa, who I think is really off-putting for all of them in a lot of ways. I mean, Christopher, I don't think ever meets her, but Christopher never meets anybody.
Christopher doesn't really meet anybody there.
But so I think
he meets Tano or whatever his name
is.
is.
He does meet one woman who's lying in bed with him at the end.
Yeah, I guess he does meet an Italian.
Paulie also meets a prostitute who's amazing. I love that character.
Yeah.
I love her because she's, I don't know, she's great. She's just like no nonsense, like very much unlike, again, these images of women who we know that they think about. They were trying to watch The Godfather or The Godfather II at the
Godfather
beginning.
II, I think, because, the only reason
Tony
why...
talks about it,
no, because I forget who it is, but one of them says that their favorite scene is when he pulls in Fredo for the kiss and says, you broke my heart, so that's Godfather II.
Yeah, and then Tony describes the scene where, with the crickets and the music, where they're going back to visit Don
Ciccio. So going back. So they were going to watch Godfather II, which is a great idea. It's always a good idea to watch Godfather II.
Yes.
And there's some stuff actually in Godfather 2 that kind of ties into this episode, and we actually saw it
Was
recently.
there any orange juice?
There actually was orange juice.
I know. When Paulie was with this prostitute. I know.
That's true. But there's a few things actually, because when we were watching it recently, there's a couple moments that I think like really tie in to The Sopranos on the whole, and I think are directly kind of taken from that movie and placed into this world. So it's interesting that they reference it like so directly in this one. One of them actually talking about when we were mentioning the Roman allusions that have happened throughout the show and in this episode, Tony's dream and the Oracle of Delphi. There's a really critical exchange at the end of Godfather 2 where Tom Hagen and Frank Pentangeli are talking about was like this thing of ours, saying like it was like the Roman Empire. Like saying that outright and saying, well, I don't know if it is now, but it was. And for me, that was like a really critical moment for Tony as a character who's constantly referring back to Roman history and having like a house where the architecture is evocative of Roman architecture, watching, like a lot of things. I mean, just his interest in history in general and constant references to Rome, I think is interesting in the context of the mafia world and relating it to that movie.
And we see that in this episode as well. And I'll let you, I'm sure you have something else to say, but we see that when they first pull up in the taxi to their hotel and they say something about like there's an arch kind of behind them and they make some reference to Artie's restaurant, like if he saw how it really looked in real life, like something. I forget exactly what they say. And then of course you were just talking about like the house that Tony lives in, right, which is like tries its best to be to refer to Italian architecture. But then we see, of course, the house that Annalisa lives in, and even like the hotel that they stay in are trying to reference more like modern, non-Italian architecture and style, I guess, except for when they go into her backyard or the house where her father was born that's next door to her very modern house. Right?
Yeah, totally. Yeah. I mean, definitely. And I think there's actually, there's a lot of things from the movie. I mean, I think they'll kind of come up and we can discuss them as they happen.
Okay.
But there's even some things from that movie, even in terms of like the symbols that this show uses, that I think are kind of like an homage or coming from that movie,
Totally.
outside of oranges, which is a pretty obvious one. And I think this show actually expands on it. Something that I think is worth looking out for is eggs in this show. I feel like Sopranos kind of develops their own symbolism of eggs as opposed to oranges. They actually like grow out of using oranges. So that's something to like look out for in the,
like
in
when
the episodes coming up.
when Angie drops the eggs on the floor in this episode.
Maybe. Yeah, there's an example, but there's a lot coming up. And tying that to death and ruin and some other things. The other big one for me upon watching that movie recently is water. And there's some shots of like Fredo right before he's brought out, and well, man, I don't want to ruin Godfather II for anyone who hasn't seen it. I probably just did, but that's okay. I guess most people have probably seen the Godfather movies. That movie came out in 1973. It's fine. Go see it. It's a great movie.
Yeah.
But there's some shots that have a character kind of like contemplating something over a body of water,
right,
that are almost identical to the framing of shots in The Sopranos.
Right.
And they kind of come up at similar times when people are like contemplating their mortality.
Yeah.
And water just kind of, is always showing up. And in particular, like scenes of like people at a dock or like, people in a frame that's predominantly like a lake or a pond or something, and just having one person like just squeezed into the frame is kind of coming from the movie.
Yeah.
There was a few things even like in this that I thought were interesting. Some of the symbolism of this show that they've really developed within their language. One thing I was thinking of is when he's with Annalisa and they're golfing, and you have these kind of like, not branches, but kind of like wisps of a tree or greenery that like typically we've seen moving in the wind. And they're actually like very still in this moment. There's something actually that's like not moving things around, whereas they typically are when there's kind of something like that showing up. And then interestingly, like right after that scene, they go to a restaurant with kind of like this window behind them with this kind of like water behind them, which is almost identical to the scene in Isabella where they go to a restaurant. And there's actually like a direct close-up on Annalisa's mouth, and there was this direct close-up on Isabella's teeth before going into his fantasy of this like Italian mother. Yeah. So I thought that was that was definitely interesting.
Well, I was going to talk about that in terms of women, because I think that is an interesting contrast, right? Because they do definitely do things to make you think of Isabella during this episode.
Yeah.
And like for sure there was a lot of scenes that really reflected that. But Isabella and Annalisa are completely different women. I think like Isabella really does fit into, although she's ostensibly a dental student or whatever.
Right.
I mean, a dream dental student. She is this kind of like old world, like when we see her holding baby Antonio or whatever, right? Like it is evocative of that kind of imagery of these like traditional mothers, right? Whereas Annalisa is also a mother, right? But she holds so much power. I was also going to talk about how she uses men's golf clubs. I thought that was great. Like, we could get you a set of women's golf clubs.
Well, there's just so many ways that she is challenging the like stereotypes and gender roles that they're all carrying and bringing there, the prejudice. Yeah. And it's interesting, just to see like how actually it works in Italy, and that they're confronted with the fact that their worldview is kind of wrong in a way, that it doesn't hold true, that things that they thought weren't possible are completely possible, clearly, and in some ways, as we're seeing, may even work better. That there's advantages, like, that her as a woman brings things to that job that actually are advantageous.
Totally.
Yeah, to that family.
Can we talk for just a second about Don Vittorio?
Yeah. He's the best.
He's really the best.
He just loves street
guy.
names.
I love the way he says Major Deegan Expressway.
It's a great thing to talk about.
It's like Major Deegan Expressway.
I also like it when Annalisa then kind of like wheels him, and she's like, "We can talk about street names later," and he just looks so pissed and
yeah,
sad.
he's like, oh, come on, guys.
Just want to talk about street names.
And then later, I didn't catch this, like, I don't think in past viewings, he's like, what street are we taking to get home? Like, he's also, like, just obsessed with streets.
That's literally all he talks about. There's something about him that actually reminds me of Don Ciccio,
I know,
too.
me too.
From Godfather II.
It's just that...
Well, this is the last scene, actually, where Don Ciccio's, like, kind of, like, older, kind of, like, decrepit, like, sitting in this chair.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, me too. I was thinking about that. I don't know if it was a wheelchair in Godfather 2, but
I don't remember the exact.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it is kind of like the passing of the old guard too. Like for a show that has so many generational themes, like you have Don Ciccio dying when Don Corleone comes back and kills him and kind of like ushers in this new era. I mean, mostly for himself. It's like a personal journey, but he's like, there's a sense of closure to kind of like where he comes from in terms of him becoming who he had to be. And there's something too, like there's like a new paradigm or something with Annalisa running the family.
Yeah.
I thought it was interesting too with her as a character when she's talking to Tony and they're at the household home. And actually, first of all, as they're talking, there's like the classic Soprano shot where you see two people talking, like Tony and Annalisa, and then in between them, you can see her dad, the Don in Italy, kind of just like in the distance behind them as they're actually talking about him, which is great. But I thought it was super interesting where she said, "What are you gonna do? Send him to a Spitz?" I think she was using an Italian word, but talking about like, well, like what are you gonna do? Like you can't. You need to look after him. He's family. Yeah, and that was really interesting compared to
Junior.
Well, Junior and also with Livia. I mean, all the drama in season 1 occurring around Tony sending her to an old age home. Of course. And her not being able to understand that coming from these kind of like older values.
I mean, it branches kind of nicely into a discussion of like, you know, going back to your ancestral home or whatever we want to call that theme of this episode, right? Because we've already kind of talked a little bit about the differences, right? Like between, and we've like mentioned things like old world and new world values and things like that. But I kind of want to go into that a little bit deeper. Was there anything else you had on like some of the women in this episode that you wanted to?
I think no, that sounds great. Yeah, let's do that.
I just felt like, I don't know, all the characters, like, so there's all these Italian characters going back to Italy. All of them, I don't know if Tony's been there before even.
Right?
I think I'm correct in saying that none of them have been there before. Because they talk about it. Like Paulie says outright, which I just love Paulie for so many reasons, but I love him a lot in this episode. Saying, like, this is a big deal for me. Yeah. You know? We have Junior even back home saying, I never got to go there. Yeah. We have the rest of the, you know, nuclear Soprano family, well, we don't see AJ, I guess, but we see Meadow and Carmela both being visibly upset that they're not going to Italy with Tony. We see for Christopher, right? Again, I don't want to talk about it, but we see he wants to go to the topless beaches and he wants to go to Mount Vesuvius. Yeah. It's a big deal. Yeah, totally. You know, we have, like, even back home, like, I forget, Pussy's talking about it with Skip. Right. You know? Yeah. We see this is a big deal for these characters of Italian heritage. Right. Also interesting to see Pussy talking about it with Skip in a way that's actually giving him real information on those transactions. On the car thing, yeah. Yeah. I mean, the danger that presents to Tony that we see. Yeah. I thought it was also, with that too, like with Junior saying he never went and then Tony kind of like patting him on the back and saying it's not over yet, leaves Junior like in a wheelchair sitting there. Like there's definitely a sense of like a downward trajectory from here for Junior. Yeah. Like, I don't know. I'm not left from that interaction. I don't leave that feeling like Junior probably will get to Italy. Yeah. And like things do look rather bleak for him. It's interesting seeing Junior in a wheelchair, right? Because we don't see that really. Well, maybe he's turning into that, Italian Don or Don Ciccio Don or Vittoria. Right. So many Dons. But I was gonna say, like, you know, Don again, Junior. It's that's funny. Is it? But yeah, so we see these characters kind of grappling with this aspect, but yet for all of them, Italy doesn't isn't what it's cracked up to be in their minds or whatever, right? So I love that the opening scene. Well, first of all, the opening scene is an FBI warning, which is great always, right?
Yeah.
But then they're trying to watch The Godfather II, and so they're putting themselves. Tony mentions like when he's talking about his favorite scene, he mentions the crickets. And, we've had in past episodes. I mean, obviously, lots of references to nature, but we've had like Janice in 2 episodes ago talk about how she misses the fireflies, right?
Yeah.
So, they're not crickets, obviously, but we have this reference to these other places that are more pure, more whatever, right? They're all watching or trying to watch this movie. Once they get there, right, we have, I can't talk about Christopher, but we have Paulie, right? So Paulie's a great character to talk about in his, experience with this. He's an older guy. Like, he's not young. It's his first time getting to Italy. He's the one, he actually speaks, it seems, relatively good Italian.
Right.
He at least can, like,
I mean, he does call everybody Commendatori, which is plural.
Yeah, but, he thought that was a great word.
Right.
he was like probably the most excited,
right,
and the most, he tried to put himself out there and call people commendatory. It was lovely. He even we'll get to that in a second. He goes on like their day off or whatever they have. I don't know what, like Christopher's still doing drugs, but he goes off and he decides to like go visit a cafe, right? He goes to the only one that has English language writing on it, which is so touristy. Like you know those places when you travel abroad, right? Yeah. The places that are going to be touristy. It says like Napoleon Express or something.
Yeah.
And he's sitting there and he's having his coffee or whatever, and he says to some guys at a table, "Commendatori."
Yeah. And then who looks over at him?
Who turns around?
David Chase.
David Chase.
Creator of the show. Wearing all black.
I mean,
responding.
He's supposed to be Italian.
Right.
He was dressed like a suave Italian man.
Yeah. But there's something about that. Like, I think that scene, all the characters in Italy who Paulie interacts with and is so excited to see and interact with and say this one words to, all of them respond with like the most banal things. Like, one of them asks if he's from NATO and he's like, "You cut our ski lift." And he's never getting what he wants. Like, his romanticized image of Italy kind of comes crashing down. And like, even for instance, like when he goes to the Pisha Do, he needs to go to the restroom, he can't go because he goes in and he realizes the like kind of ugly truth of like that, those rooms that are there or whatever that like everybody there just kind of deals with. Like, it's not all romantic and glitzy and beautiful. And so I think that's a key moment, like in an episode that's written by David Chase, directed by him.
That he put himself in.
That he put himself in. I mean, that's it. I mean, that's a big deal. So I think like them being so excited about Italy, mythologizing about it, and drawing their value system from this old country and having a sense of identity that comes from there. And when they go, they're so excited, but then when they interact with it, nobody's interested and people just live normal lives. And so David Chase doesn't even dignify with a response. He just kind of like turns around and vibes him.
Yeah. And
there's something to that.
Totally.
Like, that's almost like a central part of the show.
Totally. Yeah, no, for me, it was a really important scene. I think it is also, like, I thought what you said about the mythologizing. Like, I think that's also David Chase trying to, like, bring us back to reality in some ways, And, like...
and it happens throughout the entire episode. Like, when he's with the prostitute, when Paulie's with the prostitute, and he says... Ariana Alpino, I'm sorry, anybody who speaks Italian, that was horrible. Yeah. But, he's so excited. He's like, our families probably knew each other. And she goes, yeah, Ariana Alpino. And she goes, like, it's right over there. Yeah. So it's like, it's so immediate for them. Like, it's just like, that's a place over there. It doesn't mean anything, but they've built up, like mythology about what these places are and what it means. And yet it's meaningless to the people who actually live there.
Yeah. I was going to go back to, I said that Paulie was kind of good at Italian, but I wish I knew about Italian to hear probably how bad they are, right? Or like maybe it's kind of like, like Quebecois French, where it's like they must speak an older version of Italian. You know what I mean? Like that it's like some kind of like, it's not the Italian that Italians speak.
Right.
And I don't even know if like Commendatori, like that was maybe just like a hotel guy, like hotels kind of have these
Right.
like chintzy kind of
Yeah.
things. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know. Someone can tell me
Yeah.
if that's something that people actually even say.
Yeah. Email us and tell us about
Yeah.
Italian,
Yeah.
please.
Just clarify that for us. We have also, even back in Soprano Land, we have some references to the old world, with Carmela and her friends continuously listening to Andrea Bocelli's song. What's it called?
Conte Partiro.
Conte
or
Partiro.
Partira, yeah.
Which again, and like even I forget who says it. Like, oh God, with this song, like
Yeah, I feel like that song is like the soundtrack to Carmela's arc in this episode. It's really interesting. First of all, the way that they bring in the song is super fascinating. So the first time we see it is with Pussy,
starts when he's
and it
coming
starts
out
with
of
him.
the party store. Yeah.
And obviously that music isn't there, but then they cut to Carmela, and
Rosalie and Angie.
Yeah, and the song is actually like referenced. So we have like an example of like diegetic music that's like actually happening there, but the way they edit to it is coming from like a suspended disbelief of the music happening. And then that happens again actually with Tony, and then it cuts to in Italy, and then it cuts to Carmela, and then Janice is like, ugh, again with this song.
That's right.
So it happens multiple times, and like we were talking about earlier, I feel like at the end of the episode, that's kind of when it reaches the apex of Carmela's arc for this episode, and maybe even the entire series so far. It's like reaching a crescendo. And actually that happens earlier too, where they're playing the song and it reaches like the final part, and then Annalisa takes a swing with her golf club.
Right.
So there's like this like rising crescendo of the song. Like it's
what about
raising.
the part where the drums happen? There's like a drum, like a marching
well, this is like
drum.
I think this is like really like truly like the end. It's like could not be more epic.
Okay.
It's like a joke almost how epic it is. But then she makes her golf shot, and I feel like that's almost indicative of like cracks are starting to show for Tony to Carmela. Like she's kind of on this process during this episode of realizing the power she actually has.
Yeah.
And it also makes me think like based on Tony and Annalisa's relationship so far, maybe it's also signifying that like his undoing will be his interaction with women on the whole.
Right.
And his interaction with women outside of his marriage.
Right.
So his infidelity.
Yeah.
Him kind of philandering. Is that a word?
Yeah.
Okay, philandering. Just want to make sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah. Anyway, I thought that was interesting. And then I think that like that last scene is so pivotal. And then again, they use the music to emphasize Carmela kind of getting somewhere.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. I had to look up what Conte Partiro meant. Because I needed to know. I know, like, there is this, like, English version of the song, which is, like...
Time to say goodbye.
Time to say goodbye. But Conte Partiro, in what I looked up, actually means, with you I leave. And so that is kind of interesting. Again, we, like, can overanalyze this shit to death.
Yeah.
But at the same, like, Tony left Carmela at home, right? She didn't come with him on this business trip, right? And that's in the English version, like, time to say goodbye kind of thing. But the actual meaning of it, like, and again, with this kind of, like, old world values kind of thing, it's actually, like, with you I leave, right? So it's, like, let's both go to Italy kind of thing. I don't know. There was something to that also, like...
Right.
And again, with Carmela loving this song so much, like, and we hear it twice in this episode. And I feel like we hear it in future episode, too. I feel like it comes back.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
Maybe with Furio or something. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, it's definitely
I feel like we hear it again, but there is something to that. Like, there's this like bastardized kind of version of it in English,
right?
Which I think like was more popular than the original Italian version,
right?
Probably.
Well, there's something to that because it's actually like. No, this is kind of, I mean, it's kind of a trashy song in some ways. That's not like high art or that cultured.
No.
And in fact, yeah, it even kind of reflects like the use of music in this episode. Like when they're sitting down at the table in Italy, there's more sophisticated music. And then whenever Christopher has a scene, it goes to like more like kind of like lowbrow or whatever, you know, like lowbrow Italian music that signifies like that character is having their moment in the episode. So there's a lot of that. And the other thing about Conte Partiro is they directly link that song to divorce, because as that song is playing and crescendoing, it reaches its apex in the scene with Rosalie Angie and Carmela.
Right, when they're at the restaurant talking about
when Angie says, I'm going to file for a divorce. That's when it reaches the peak.
Oh, interesting.
So there's an association between that song and building towards a divorce specifically.
Yeah.
So that's something that we have that's really interesting.
Yeah.
And I thought it was interesting just the way that they used music to signify characters in this episode.
Yeah. We also have more, like, I noticed it more than usual, maybe, like, music starting in one scene and then going into another scene where it is diegetic. Like, maybe, I don't know, maybe I'm just noticing it more in this episode. But
no, I think there was more in this episode.
Yeah. But, I mean, David Chase doesn't do anything.
Well, the other interesting one was as Tony's driving into the compound, you have these, like, cinematic strings, which is very unusual for this show.
Coming not from anywhere.
Yeah, like, which is unusual for this show.
Yeah.
Because there's such a sense of realism, that doesn't happen that often. But then it gets broken as they get to the compound. They're playing hip-hop.
Yeah.
You know, like Italian hip-hop music.
I know, there's a bunch of shitty Italian hip-hop music.
We're sorry if you're a big fan of Italian hip-hop. Val just totally slandered you and your musical taste.
I think it's shitty.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's fucked up.
I'm saying it. Yeah. What else about? So like I don't know. Like this is the only time we get this kind, this is the only time we get this kind of return to our home. I kind of in some ways wish, like, as the series goes on, we do get more, like, we explore kind of further, like, Tony's obsession with the History Channel and different aspects of Italian American culture, right? Like, we haven't actually got that deep on that kind of stuff yet. So in some ways I wish that this episode, I wish we had, like, another trip to Italy or something. Right. I don't know, because I just feel like there's a lot there for these characters.
Totally.
And for the characters who didn't get to go. But
yeah, well, there's some travels. Carmel has travels.
That's
later
right.
On, so
she goes to Paris, though, doesn't she?
Yeah. I thought it was interesting in the end seeing the reactions of the three characters from the mob family who went to Italy. Paulie, Tony, and Chris, and, like, just looking at the way that they're acting. Yeah. So you have, like,
I think we have to talk about Christopher
for
a second.
There. Yeah, well, I mean, like, in the end, he just looks dazed and drugged. Yeah. So, I mean, that's all that he's coming home with. Yeah. Like, he wasn't processing any of these things.
I just wish he could have gone to the volcano. I never noticed. It makes me really sad. I can't really talk about it too much.
I'm getting that. Yeah, it seems to be a pressure point.
No, it really is. Like, I mean, like I've said before, I think Christopher's my favorite storyline, and so, like, his stuff really does impact me. But that scene where you can hear, like, the hotel announcement in the background saying, like, the whatever trip to Vesuvius is leaving now. Yeah. And then it's some shitty Italian hip hop, I think, playing in the background.
Ooh, double hit for you.
And we see him lying in a hotel bed, just, like, kind of, like, half cross-eyed, like, petting this prostitute. And,
Yeah.
It's, like, it's kind of our first, like, remember I mentioned it a couple episodes ago, how he was talking, like, there was this, like, brief mention to him cooking.
Right.
Right? Which was our only indicator that he was doing heroin.
Yeah.
Right? But, like, then we see when he notices, what's his name? Tano?
Maybe. I think so. Yeah. I think so.
Tano?
Believe so. Yeah.
We notice, like, his track marks, right? And we see, like, that's how Christopher identifies him as someone who he could hang out with.
Right.
It's awful. It's really, like, it's really awful.
Yeah.
It also, like, is a little bit confusing for me. Like, I know he tells Paulie, like, he has stomach flu or whatever, but, like, nobody else really notices.
Right. Well, we'll see how long that can hold up for.
Well,
I mean, it's pretty hard to be a high-functioning
It holds up for a while.
Heroin addict.
Yeah. But
I mean, the show is really introducing that into Christopher's arc. I mean, talking about his arc as a character who directly references that and talks about he wants to have an arc. I mean, there's something that's happening right now that's changing his character.
I know.
And his place in the world.
And then he picks up Adriana from the duty-free Fendi bag and a bottle of Campari.
Is that a good present?
It's a good present, but...
Could have been better.
I mean, maybe that's what he would have got her anyways, but he would have gotten it in Italy, right? I think that's kind of indicative, again, kind of this, like, returning to your homeland or whatever. Like, yeah, those are two things that come from Italy. Yeah. That's correct, right? Like, at least he didn't mess it up and...
Right.
get something from somewhere else.
Right, yeah.
but they've been like Americanized, and they'll have
Yeah.
like American labeling on them, and like it'll be,
Yeah.
you know what I mean, to someone who knows anything, it'll be like almost immediately clear that was the
Right.
case,
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, I can't talk about
Yeah,
Christopher.
well, and in some ways, there's not that much to even talk about because he's kind of just going off the deep end. And
Yeah.
that's kind of the extent of it. Like, all these things that we're kind of talking about and piecing together, he's not capable of engaging with things that way, the same way he has been in previous episodes, because he's just drugged out now.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I thought it was interesting. Yeah, like in that lesson, you have Chris just kind of sitting there. You have Tony looking kind of like contemplative, looking out and angry. And you have Paulie looking actually like really relaxed and
Yeah.
actually like happy to be
Yeah.
seeing the sights that we've
Are
come to
familiar.
recognize
Yeah.
of New Jersey with this show of like industrial decay and bridges and factories. But they're all kind of dealing with it differently after
Yeah.
their trip. So it's interesting where they all end up and how they all interact with Italy when they're there.
Yeah, I was just going to say, just going back to Christopher momentarily, the excuse that Paulie makes for Chris at that first dinner on the first night is that, he's gone down to get a gift for Adriana.
Right.
Which, again, like, we know that he didn't. That was, like, the excuse, right?
Right.
Like, he should have been getting his girlfriend a gift while he was there. He should have been going to
Yeah.
Vesuvius. That's what you do when you go away somewhere.
Right.
You
And I
go-
guess you sell some stolen cars.
You sell some
to
stolen cars.
Italian, yeah. It's what it's just what
And
you do on
you
a trip to Naples.
Go to Mount Vesuvius.
Yeah, I thought so. Yeah, with that too, there was some interesting parallels between New Jersey and Naples culture. First of all, the scene with the firecracker, the
Right.
kid. There's something actually too about that kind of related to Godfather II, the way that was shot. Like the kid coming out and his mom screaming after
Yeah,
him.
it was
That was
very-
similar to the original Don Ciccio scene.
Yeah.
But just like Tony kind of grappling with like how the mob runs there. Like the
Yeah.
violence is almost on like another
I
level.
think he kind of liked it.
Interesting. See, I don't know if I got that, but it's possible. That's definitely a possible
Or I think
interpretation.
he at least he didn't not like it.
I thought he was almost like, yeah. For me, a little bit, he was like kind of like concerned or off put by it, but
Okay.
I don't know. That's just
Okay.
me. But then also all the scenes of food that would happen in Italy and then in New Jersey. So obviously,
he
like,
yeah.
yeah,
No, I was gonna say he tells Carmela to bring the kids to Great Wall or whatever,
Yeah.
right? Like,
yeah.
yeah.
Great suggestion.
Yeah.
Well, even in that scene, actually, so after the original scene where they're talking about food and Paulie asks for macaroni and gravy, it cuts to that scene where he says to go to Great Wall. Carm's actually making red sauce and pasta.
Yeah.
So she actually has the pasta out. So she's actually making
And
those
some
like
kind of meat.
interesting. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I wonder if she was making her ziti like us.
No, she wasn't. But yeah, Paulie's like, have you tried this octopus? And Tony's like, stop interrupting
Yeah.
me. He's like, no, it's a big deal for me.
Yeah. Right. I thought I have kind of some like stray observations
Well, we
at
didn't
this
really
point.
talk about marriage, but
Well, the one that I wanted to talk about, actually, that was what I was going to bring up,
Yeah.
is the scene with Carmela and Janice. Janice doesn't have
Yeah.
much screen time here.
just that
But
scene.
even that's amazing, like that this show has a critical scene like that really doesn't take that much time, but also like progresses where we are with Janice. Her talking about Richie like in basically like a line of dialogue.
Yeah.
We're almost like moving forward like in this episode
Yeah,
where she
in
is
time.
with Richie
Yeah.
and talking about it with Carmela. It's so efficient. But that's a really interesting scene. So where she's talking to Carm about Angie Bonpensero, and then she kind of owns up to the fact that she's actually talking about Carmela. Mm-hmm. And Carmela is kind of coming to grips with that. And I think that that's part of her journey to get to the end of the episode, where she starts to change her conceptions of what that means. And it's interesting to see Janice and her perspective on all these things, because it kind of morphs back to actually being about Carmela. And Janice is, again, just kind of like sowing discord. And eventually it's interesting too, because then Janice brings up these things about Richie, and then Carmela's able to turn it on her. She's kind of like
Yeah.
laughing at her about like how clueless she actually is in her own life. But when she leaves, she's like laughing, but she's clearly unhappy. So
Yeah.
she's clearly like reflecting on what Janice has said, and she's realizing that there are major problems in her relationship and in her life.
Yeah. Also, just as of note, she makes one like, I guess Janice has been to Italy. She says, "Oh, Italy, it's like no big deal," or whatever.
Right.
Like, because she thinks that Carmela's upset about that.
Yeah.
Which Carmela's, clearly actually probably more upset about the Angie Bonpensiero thing.
Right.
But she's like, oh, Italy, like, why are you still thinking about that? Like, when I went there, it just, like, got harassed, got sexually harassed all the time.
Yeah.
So it's interesting to think about, like, yeah, like, an Italian woman going to Italy, and that's Janice's impression of it.
Right.
I mean, Janice's point of view is obviously really skewed, but...
Yeah.
Yeah, no, just a couple little things on the marriage thing that I had, because I think it really did come up as a theme, and we start to see, like, the dissolution of or, like, the potential dissolution of these marriages. I think it's really tied in with religion, and I, like, from my own Catholic family, I can also think about that, but we have a lot of focus on people's wedding rings at different times. So, like, we have it for both Carmela and for Annalisa.
Interesting.
There's, like, really clear camera shots that focus on those. We have a lot of references, too, right? Like, when Angie says, like, again, with the religion thing, when Angie says, like, I think I'm going to get a divorce, we have Rosalie making the sign of the cross. We have, like... Pussy saying Jesus Christ when Angie told him about the lump or whatever. We have references like you mentioned when Janice, or I think it was, I forget who it was said to, but like I guess Carm is talking. Well, actually, sorry, when she's talking, when she goes over to Angie's place. And she says things like marriage is a sacred bond or sacred institution. Family is a sacred institution. Also, there's like something about family later. She says like things like, what the church says. I love when they talk about, well, actually it's when Janice and Carmela are talking about Pussy, and they say he's an adoring father. Oh no, he's super macho. They talk about his Gumars. They talk about the Madonna horror complex. They talk about marriage being a holy sacrament, family being sacred. And I love later when Angie says, like, well, let the Pope live with him. Yeah. Then I think that's a great line.
Right.
But so we see, all these kinds of, like, tight bonds that these characters are tied up in terms of their marriages. We don't really see that in Italy, right? Like, all we know about Annalisa is that her husband's in jail. They do focus on her wedding rings, for sure. But she's a little bit more, she's way more free.
Yeah.
Than these other characters are
totally
to live as women. So, I just
definitely, yeah. No, that's good. Yeah. There was a few things actually at the beginning, just some stray things. I mean, the whole first carjacking scene with Churchill the dog running away.
Yeah.
Just like the collateral damage of Tony's lifestyle, and then like the edit from that. So this family kind of being like torn apart. I mean, not completely torn apart, but clearly like affected and damaged and hurt and like impacting children and their relationship, And then Tony is so happy looking at the pictures
these
of the
Polaroids that they've
like
taken.
He's so content. He's so in his element. And just the fact that as a character, he just thrives on other people's misfortune.
Yeah. But it's never like directly related to him, really.
No.
Yeah.
No, it requires the misfortune of others for him to capitalize on it.
Yeah.
And then the other thing that I thought was really interesting is as they're watching Godfather II...
Trying to watch it.
Trying to watch Godfather II. Pussy is asking questions about Junior.
Yeah.
And he's the only character who has a tracksuit that's zipped up. Everyone else is just wearing like an undershirt or like a t-shirt or like a polo t-shirt.
No, Silvio has a very weird shirt on. It's like
but nobody has like a jacket that's like actually.
He's wearing like a leopard print blouse, basically.
Well, he wears some weird shit. But even just like looking at what people are wearing in that scene, there's something about him just like kind of like concealing something of himself more
like when he
than
gets
the others.
Kind of like a negative response to the stuff about Junior.
He kind of asks again. It's interesting. It makes me wonder if he's wired at that moment. I think there's definitely like an implication of that.
Yeah, me too.
Yep. Well, that's great. I like going to Italy. It was fun. I liked eating ziti. That was fun. What else was fun? Talking about Sopranos was fun.
Yeah.
Watching Sopranos was fun.
Mm-hmm.
If you make meatballs, make sure to dip your Italian bread in water. It's a nice trick.
Yeah. Sleeping will be fun.
Yeah, lots of fun things.
All right.
Well, hope you had fun.
Yeah, we had fun, and we will record a new episode soon.
Yeah.
Okay.
See you then.
Bye.